The first letter showed up on a Tuesday. Just a plain white envelope shoved into the mailbox of my family's cabin. No postage, no return address, just the bold, red stamped letters across the top. HOA notice of violation. Now, here's the thing. My name's Silas Kearney. I'm a carpenter by trade, and I grew up in this cabin. It's been in my family since the late 1800s, back when this mountain wasn't even on any map. Hell, the trees were taller than the law back then. I'd spent the last year fixing it up, planning to retire here in peace. That piece cracked the second I saw the name printed on the bottom of the notice. Trina Dobbins, HOA chairwoman. I knew her the moment she stepped out of her silver SUV the next morning, heels crunching on gravel, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a voice that carried like a foghorn through the trees. "Mr. Kearney," she said, not even offering a handshake. "I'm here to inform you that this structure is in violation of our community building codes." I leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. "You mean my cabin? The one that's been here since before your HOA was even a twinkle in anyone's eye?" Trina adjusted her sunglasses. "According to our records, no permit was ever filed. That makes it an illegal structure. It must be removed within 90 days. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Removed? Lady, this cabin's been here since 1892. You think it just popped up last week?" She pursed her lips like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Regardless of its age, it doesn't meet the standards of our association. And as of 2 years ago, this area was annexed into the Maple Ridge Mountain HOA jurisdiction. That includes your lot." I narrowed my eyes. "Funny, I don't remember signing anything agreeing to that." Trina didn't blink. "It was voted on by the board. I suggest you cooperate, or fines will begin accruing immediately." I watched her get back into her SUV and drive off, dust in her wake. That night, I went down into the crawlspace beneath the cabin and pulled out the old lockbox my grandfather told me about when I was a kid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed fabric, was the original hand-scribed deed from 1892, signed, sealed, and recorded at the county clerk's office back when the land was still considered a frontier. Next morning, I drove down to the county records office, and sure enough, they still had the microfiche copy. The land was deeded to my great-great-grandfather, and here's the kicker: it was marked as a private in holding. That meant it was never legally included in any later land annexations, including Trina's precious HOA. When I got back to the cabin, there were 2 more notices pinned to my door. One said I owed $500 in fines. The other was an order to vacate. I grinned. Game on, Trina. I didn't waste time. Before sunrise the next morning, I had the original deed scanned, notarized, and filed with the county assessor's office. The clerk, a woman named Marla whose grandfather used to hunt elk with mine, raised her eyebrows as she slid the yellowed document into a protective sleeve. "Well, this'll stir the pot," she muttered. "Maple Ridge HOA's been trying to swallow up every inch of the mountain." Few folks bothered to push back. I gave her a nod. "They picked the wrong man this time." I stopped by the sheriff's office on the way back. Sheriff Harris knew my family. He'd been around long enough to remember when the road up to the cabin was just a dirt track. I handed him a copy of the notice telling me to vacate. He read it twice, then looked up. "They put this on your door," bold as brass, I said. "They've got no jurisdiction over that land, not unless you signed into their covenant, and I know you didn't." "Exactly. I want something on record in case they try anything stupid." "I'll log it," he said. "And if they set foot on your property again without cause, call me." Back at the cabin, I installed a set of motion-triggered cameras on the perimeter. Not because I was expecting trouble, but because I'd learned over the years that folks who act entitled rarely stop at just paperwork. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. I almost missed the second SUV, black this time, with tinted windows creeping up the gravel road. I stood when it stopped just outside the tree line. 2 men got out. One was tall, wiry, with a clipboard tucked under one arm. The other had a jacket with security consultant stitched in white thread over the chest. The first man called out, "Mr. Kearney, that's me. We're here on behalf of Maple Ridge HOA. Your presence on this property is being evaluated for non-compliance." I stepped off the porch. "You're trespassing. We're conducting a preliminary inspection. Got a warrant?" "No, sir, but under HOA bylaws, wrong again. I'm not under any HOA. You're on private land, and unless you've got a badge or a court order, I suggest you leave." They didn't move. The security guy shifted his stance slightly, like he thought I might back down. "I didn't. I've got cameras rolling," I said. "Sheriff's been notified. You've got about 30 seconds before I call it in and press trespassing charges." The clipboard man opened his mouth to argue, but the other one grabbed his arm. "Let's go." They left without another word. I watched their taillights vanish between the pines, then reviewed the footage, made copies, and stored it in 3 separate places. The following morning, my power went out. I checked the fuse box first. Nothing tripped. I followed the line down the hill and found the issue fast enough the connection had been severed. Clean cut, right at the junction where the power company's responsibility ended and mine began. Coincidence? Maybe, but I didn't think so. I drove into town and filed a report with the sheriff, then called the electric company. They sent a guy named Joel who looked at the cut and let out a low whistle. "That wasn't no animal," he said. "Too straight. Someone used a cable saw. Can you restore it?" "Sure. But if it happens again, you'll need to put in a lockbox or bury the line." I stood there, arms crossed. "Do it." Joel got the line fixed by sundown. I paid him in cash, then went to the county courthouse the next morning. I wanted to see the original HOA annexation documents for myself. The clerk pulled them up on a dusty screen and printed a copy. The map showed the HOA boundary line drawn neatly, except it curved oddly around one corner mine. And then, in a different color ink, someone had extended the line over my lot. The handwriting was different. There was no timestamp or board signature attached to the amendment. I stared at it. "Who filed this addition?" The clerk leaned forward. "Doesn't say. That's not standard protocol." "Can I get a certified copy of this?" He nodded. "I'll have it ready in 5 minutes." I called an old friend, Maria Alvarez, a land rights attorney who used to fight oil companies downstate. She was smart, relentless, and allergic to bullies. She drove up that weekend, reviewed everything I had, and her eyebrows climbed with each page. "This is fraudulent," she said. "They forged a boundary extension. That's a felony." "I figured it wasn't legal," I said, "but you're saying they broke actual laws." "Several. Tampering with county records, unauthorized modification of registered plats, attempted seizure of private property through deceit. And if they cut your power line, that's sabotage." She made some calls. By Monday morning, we had a meeting set with the county DA. The assistant district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Lillian Cho, flipped through the documents we brought. When she saw the altered boundary map, she froze. "This is not part of the official plat," she said. "There's no authorization for this change." "Then someone from the HOA falsified it," Maria said, "and they've been issuing fines based on that." Lillian tapped the page. "I'll open an investigation immediately. In the meantime, if they contact you again, let me know." That afternoon, I returned to the cabin. Nothing seemed out of place until I opened the mailbox. Inside was a folded sheet of paper printed in bold font, "Final notice. Failure to comply will result in forced removal, no signature." No letterhead, just the message. I handed it to Maria, who scowled. "This is intimidation. We're escalating." She filed for an injunction the next morning, a legal barrier preventing the HOA from taking any action against me until the investigation concluded. It was approved within 48 hours. 3 days later, the sheriff's office executed a search warrant at the Maple Ridge HOA office. According to what Maria learned, they seized multiple files, laptops, and correspondence from Trina Dobbins' office. Turns out, She had been issuing violation notices to at least 6 other property owners on the outskirts of the HOA boundary, all of them long-time residents who had never agreed to join. Her plan was simple: drown them in fines until they either gave up their property or paid to comply. Most couldn't afford to fight back, but I could, and I had. The DA charged 2 HOA board members with falsifying public documents and conspiracy to commit fraud. Trina herself was arrested for coercion and unlawful threats. I was sitting on the porch when news broke a week later. A few neighbors drove by, some stopped to talk. One man, a veteran who'd lived up the ridge since the 90s, shook my hand. "Didn't think anyone'd ever stand up to them," he said. "I just wanted to be left alone," I replied. "Yeah," he said, glancing around, "but you did more than that. You stopped them from steamrolling the rest of us." That night, I lit a fire in the old stone pit out back and sat under the stars with Maria, sipping coffee. She looked around at the trees, the silence, the cabin that still stood as it always had. "You know," she said, "they're going to have to dissolve the HOA or at least restructure it." "I don't care what they do," I said, "as long as they stay off my land. They will now." She was right. They never came back. The first hearing was set for a Thursday morning at the county courthouse, just 2 weeks after the DA's office launched their investigation. I wore my cleanest flannel shirt, boots scrubbed of mud, and carried a folder thick with affidavits, maps, and printed email threads that Maria had compiled. She met me there, sharp in a dark gray suit and carrying a leather binder that looked like it could double as a battering ram. The courtroom was half filled by the time we walked in. A few neighbors I recognized sat on the benches, murmuring quietly. At the front, behind the defendant's table, sat Trina Dobbins minus the power suit and sunglasses. Her attorney, a pale, stiff man with wire-rimmed glasses, flipped through papers without looking at her. She kept her hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. Judge Keats entered, adjusted her robe, and called the room to order. Her gaze swept across the room, lingering on Trina for a fraction longer than necessary. The DA's office led with the forged annexation map, laying out the timeline of how the HOA had submitted it, used it to expand their jurisdiction, and then issued citations based on an altered boundary that was never legally approved. The key blow came when they revealed a series of internal emails subpoenaed from the HOA's servers. One of them, written by Trina herself, read, "If we can get the older parcels under our umbrella while they're distracted or unaware, we'll be able to triple our reserve funds by next quarter. Don't give them time to push back." That line sucked the breath out of the room. Maria leaned over and whispered, "They just handed us the whole game." But it got worse. The DA's investigator took the stand and testified about a hard drive recovered from the HOA office. It contained spreadsheets tracking non-compliant parcels, including projected revenue from forced compliance or fines. My name was highlighted in red, along with notations suggesting possible legal maneuvering and apply pressure via utilities. That was when the judge interrupted. "Are you saying the HOA discussed interfering with utility services to compel compliance?" "Yes, Your Honor," the investigator answered. "We also found an invoice paid to a private contractor for line adjustment services, dated 3 days before Mr. Kearney's power was cut." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Trina's lawyer stood and objected, claiming the payment was for unrelated maintenance. But the DA followed up with surveillance footage from a wildlife camera belonging to a neighbor down the hill. It captured a man in a dark jacket crouched at the utility pole in the early morning, matched by timestamp to the day my electricity vanished. The judge turned to Trina, her voice like cold steel. "Do you have any idea how serious this is? You authorized tampering with infrastructure to extort compliance?" Trina didn't answer. Her lawyer asked for a recess. It was granted, but the judge made it clear criminal charges would be formally expanded. Outside the courthouse, reporters had started to gather. A few recognized me as I exited. Maria pulled me toward the side lot to avoid the cameras. "You just became the face of a scandal," she said, flipping open her phone to check a message. "And if these other residents come forward now, we can file a civil suit alongside the criminal case." I paused by the truck, jaw tight. "Do it, not just for me. For the rest of them." Over the next week, word spread like wildfire. 5 other cabin owners came forward, each with their own stories, unexpected fines, threats of lien placement, and in one case, a hired appraiser showing up unannounced on behalf of the HOA. Maria met with each of them, collected their documents, and helped them draft affidavits. Meanwhile, the County Planning Commission launched an internal audit of how the fraudulent map had been filed without red flags. Turns out, a junior clerk had been bribed to expedite the update without it passing through review. That employee, already under suspension, was now facing separate charges. Judge Keats ordered a temporary freeze on all HOA activities, and an independent administrator was appointed to oversee Maple Ridge operations until the investigation concluded. When news broke that the HOA's reserve funds had been quietly drained to pay for legal fees and a community improvement project that never materialized, residents demanded a full financial audit. Over 70% of them signed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. I kept out of the spotlight as much as I could. I didn't like cameras, and I didn't want my face on pamphlets or protest signs. But one morning, a knock came at my door. It was a woman named Dana Wilkes, a retired nurse who'd lived 2 ridges over for 20 years. She was holding a worn envelope. "This belonged to my brother," she said. "He passed a few years back, lived in one of the parcels they tried to annex. Found this in his files. It's a letter from the HOA from back in 2015. Thought you should see it." The letter was typed and unsigned, but it contained eerily familiar language. "Your compliance with HOA guidelines is expected. Continued resistance may result in reassessment or limitations on essential services." "They've been running this play for years," I said, my stomach turning. Maria took the letter straight to the DA. Within 48 hours, the charges against Trina expanded again, this time including long-term coercion and attempted racketeering. Her bail was revoked. The new administrator of the HOA, a soft-spoken accountant named Jeremy Fields, called a community meeting at the firehouse. I went out of curiosity more than anything. To my surprise, he opened with a public apology. "What was done in the name of this association was illegal, unethical, and harmful," he said. "We're working with the county to refund every illegitimate fine and dissolve the HOA unless the majority elects to recharter it under new leadership and legal oversight." No one raised a hand to keep it alive. Dana stood up and asked if criminal restitution would be pursued. Jeremy nodded. "The county DA has made it clear anyone financially impacted will have the opportunity to join a class action process." When the meeting adjourned, folks came up to me quiet, grateful, some still in disbelief. A man I didn't recognize offered me a jar of homemade pickles and said, "You held the line when the rest of us didn't know there was one." I didn't have much to say, just nodded and shook his hand. A few weeks later, Maria and I sat on the porch again, watching a light snow settle over the pines. She was reading over the paperwork for the civil case, already filed and gaining traction. "You know," she said, "the county's considering new legislation, something to prevent this kind of annexation abuse going forward." I took a sip of black coffee and leaned back in the old oak chair. "Good. Maybe next time someone won't have to dig up a century-old deed to stop it." She smiled faintly. "You're going to be part of that story forever." "Not looking for a plaque," I said. "Just glad the cabin's still standing." And it was. The snow kept falling, quiet and steady, as the mountain settled back into its old, undisturbed rhythm. 2 months passed, and the mountain had started thawing. Spring pushed through the frost with thick green shoots and the low hum of insects returning to life. The air smelled like wet bark and pine needles. I'd begun restaining the porch railings when a county truck rolled up the gravel tan and dusty, with the seal of the Planning Review Board stamped on the door. The man who stepped out wore a faded windbreaker and carried a tube of rolled-up documents under one arm. He introduced himself as Darrell Finch, a land surveyor contracted by the county for a complete reassessment of all parcels previously touched by the Maple Ridge HOA. "I'm here to take fresh measurements," he said, glancing up at the cabin. "The county's ordered a full boundary review. Everything that was annexed without owner consent is under review, and your property's at the top of the list." I led him to the stone marker buried, just past the clearing, an old granite post with my great-great-grandfather's initials etched into it, just as the original deed described. He marked GPS coordinates, took photos, and asked if I'd noticed any recent encroachments. "Not since the last court hearing," I said. "But if someone tries again, they won't get far," he nodded. "Can't blame you." A few lots south of here had concrete poured driveways and fences on land they didn't own. HOA had them built under the assumption they were inside the new line. "You mean under the forgery?" "Exactly." He left after an hour, promising to send a certified map once the review was complete. I watched him go, then went inside and pulled the last of the construction receipts from the drawer. I'd been documenting everything, every nail, board, and permit related to the restoration work I'd done. Maria said it would help in the civil case, especially if we wanted to show damages from their interference. By the third week of April, word came down that the HOA had officially collapsed. No board, no meetings, no remaining funds. The administrator stepped down after finalizing the public dissolution paperwork. The county absorbed what little remained, mostly a few maintenance contracts and a stack of unopened mail. But the real storm hadn't hit yet. It came out of nowhere, buried deep in the audit reports. A county IT technician flagged a string of encrypted messages found on a laptop recovered from the HOA office. The messages weren't just internal memos, they were communications between Trina and a contractor listed as Mountain Regional Asset Solutions. At first glance, it looked like another shady consulting firm. But the deeper the investigation went, the uglier it got. Turns out the contractor didn't just advise HOAs. They specialized in strategic property acquisition. Their model was simple. Push out elderly or absentee owners using legal pressure, then flip the land to developers through shell buyers. And Maple Ridge HOA had paid them nearly $70,000 over 2 years. The county sheriff's office coordinated with the state attorney general once it became clear this wasn't an isolated scam. They traced the funds to a bank account in Nevada, routed through a network of fake LLCs. Trina had signed off on every payment. Maria got the call late one night. I was fixing a loose latch on the gate when she came out onto the porch, phone still in hand. "They're charging her under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act," she said, voice tight. "Rico, this isn't just HOA corruption anymore. It's organized fraud." No one in town had seen that coming. Within days, the AG's office issued indictments for Trina and 3 others, 2 of whom had never appeared at HOA meetings. They were part of the contractor group, acting as silent liaisons between Maple Ridge and developers out of state. What chilled me most was the timeline. According to the AG's report, my cabin had been flagged as a prime acquisition target, almost a year before I moved back. They'd marked it as vulnerable due to isolated location, low surveillance risk, and unclear title records. The only part they got wrong was the title. The county held a town hall at the Civic Center the following week. The place was packed, standing room only. Residents from every corner of the ridge came, some holding property maps, others just there to listen. A deputy AG named Colin Drayton took the podium and laid it all out. "The HOA was acting as a front for a coordinated land grab," he said. They used intimidation, forged documents, and illegal fines to destabilize ownership and force desperation sales. This wasn't about community standards, it was about profits. No one clapped, no one cheered. It was too raw for that. A woman near the front asked if they could get their money back. Drayton said restitution would be handled through the civil suit. Criminal charges would come first. I stayed quiet through most of it, arms folded back against the wall. I didn't need to speak anymore. I'd already made my stand. Outside, Dana caught up to me in the parking lot. She looked tired but lighter somehow, like the weight she'd been carrying had finally shifted. "They're not coming back," she said. "Not to this mountain," I agreed. Back at the cabin, I took down the last of the perimeter cameras. Not because I didn't trust the world anymore, but because I didn't need to watch my back every second. The peace I'd wanted when I first returned, it was finally real. 3 weeks later, Maria called again. The judge overseeing the civil case had ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. The settlement fund would be paid out from liquidated assets seized from the fraudulent contractor group. Every resident who'd been fined, harassed, or had their property devalued would get compensation. She asked if I wanted to speak at the press conference. I told her no. Instead, I spent that morning replanting the old garden bed behind the cabin. My grandfather's tools still hung in the shed, rusted but solid, and the soil turned just the way I remembered it, rich, dark, full of promise. By summer, the wildflowers came back, so did the neighbors. Not all at once, not with grand gestures, but in quiet ways. A man from 2 ridges over helped me patch a stretch of the access road. Dana dropped off a basket of peaches from her tree. A retired mechanic offered to tune up my truck for free. We weren't a community bound by rules anymore. We were bound by resilience. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge and the wind carried the scent of cedar through the open windows, Maria stopped by. She'd finished the last of the filings and was heading back downstate. She stood on the porch, watching the sky fade from gold to indigo. "You know," she said, "I don't get many cases with endings like this." I handed her a mug of coffee. "What kind of endings do you usually get?" "Ones where the damage sticks. Where people give up and walk away." I looked out past the tree line where the cabin stood firm against the mountain's shoulder. "Sometimes it takes 130 years to build something that lasts," I said. "But when it does, you don't let anyone take it." She smiled, not the kind you give for show, but the kind that says it's over and it was worth it. We sat on the porch in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. No engines, no threats. Just the sound of a place returned to itself. And this time, it would stay that way.